Good evening and welcome to Florida Space Coast. You're looking at a live view of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket vertical out on pad 40 this evening, awaiting a launch opportunity at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is 2:57 a.m. UTC. I'm Stephen Clark, editor of Spaceflight Now. Welcome to our live coverage of this mission, which is set to deliver the Eutelsat 10B communications satellite into orbit. The weather is the main factor at play this evening, as it was earlier today with the scrubbed launch of a Falcon 9 rocket from nearby Pad 39A. That launch was supposed to happen at 3:54 Eastern Time, but cloud cover and rainfall at Kennedy Space Center prevented that launch from getting off the ground. SpaceX is hoping for better luck this evening. They're hoping for a clearing in some persistent cloud cover that has been over Florida Space Coast all day. Good news is the rainfall has stopped, and we have seen some views of Jupiter and some bright stars in the sky over the last hour or so, intermittently as clouds move overhead. The launch time now is an hour and 10 minutes away for this mission with the Eutelsat 10B. This mission marks the 53rd SpaceX launch of the year, and it will be the 51st orbital launch attempt from launch pads here at Cape Canaveral and at Kennedy Space Center so far in 2022. A record. Both of those are records for an individual space launch provider and for the number of space launches from Florida Space Coast in a single year as well. That launch, the CRS-26 launch that was scrubbed earlier today, has been rescheduled for Saturday afternoon at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. However, SpaceX hopes to get one more launch off before the Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll see if the weather cooperates tonight for the Eutelsat 10B mission from here at Cape Canaveral, Florida. If you look closely out at pad 40, you'll see some of those low clouds moving over the Falcon 9 rocket. The Falcon 9 stands 229 feet, or 70 meters in height in this configuration with the payload fairing on top, a little bit taller than the configuration with the Dragon capsule. As we start our coverage, please hit the like button here on our YouTube channel. That helps us gain a larger audience and a larger following for our launch coverage. So if you haven't done so already, please hit the like button here on our stream. Now 1 hour 5 minutes until tonight's launch opportunity at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time. We're seeing some occasional streams of vapor from the strong back out at pad 40. This is pretty normal at this point in the countdown as preparations are underway for the start of propellant loading, when we'll see a lot more venting from that strong back vent. That propellant loading will begin in about 30 minutes if everything goes according to plan this evening at T-minus 35 minutes. Ahead of that milestone will be a poll of SpaceX's launch team, which is down just outside the south gate of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station at SpaceX's Launch Control Center. Those team members will be polled for their go or no-go to proceed into the terminal countdown, which begins at T-minus 35 minutes. That 35-minute point is a key milestone in every SpaceX countdown. That's when the Falcon 9 countdown is put on an automatic sequencer, a computer that controls the rest of those countdown milestones leading up to liftoff. And that's also when propellants begin flowing into the two-stage Falcon 9 on the pad. Continuing to see some of these low clouds move over the launch pad or move behind the launch pad in our view. This view is looking east from our position about 4 miles away from pad 40 at Kennedy Space Center. As I mentioned, the Falcon 9 stands 229 feet tall, about 70 meters. Just to the right of the Falcon 9 in this view is the strongback. That's the mast that also doubles as the transporter erector arm to carry the Falcon 9 to the pad. We're now seeing some streaming video of weather conditions. We're seeing a satellite view of some of the cloud cover that is in question right now, whether these clouds will meet the Falcon 9's launch criteria as well as the Eastern Range's criteria for range safety. They're mainly looking out for the threat of lightning in these clouds. And of course, back to a full screen view of pad 40, of course the 4 towers, 2 on each side of the rocket, are the lightning protection masts at pad 40. These protect the rocket from lightning strikes while it's vertical awaiting liftoff. And these towers have these aviation hazard lights flashing that you're seeing throughout the countdown as SpaceX targets 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:57 a.m. UTC for the launch of Eutelsat 10B. This is a maritime and aviation communications satellite. It'll be providing things like in-flight Wi-Fi and internet services to cruise ships and to maritime transport providers across the North Atlantic, Europe, the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East. That satellite is buttoned up inside the nose cone of the Falcon 9 rocket this evening. T-minus 1 hour until the launch opportunity this evening for SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket with Eutelsat 10B. Now about 25 minutes from the expected time of the start of propellant loading on the two-stage Falcon 9 vehicle. T-minus 53 minutes, 23 seconds and counting. The only payload on tonight's mission is named Eutelsat 10B. This is a look at what that satellite looks like. This picture was taken a few months ago inside an antenna test range at the satellite's factory at Thales Alenia Space in Cannes, France. It's based on Thales's SpaceBus Neo satellite platform. It's one of the new generation satellite platforms developed in Europe. This spacecraft has a total mass at launch of about 5.5 metric tons. That's about 12,100 pounds. And Eutelsat has elected to use a Falcon 9 rocket flying in expendable mode for this mission. So this rocket does not have any landing legs on board. It also doesn't have any of the 4 hypersonic grid fins that are used for steering the rocket back through the atmosphere. So this allows the Falcon 9's first stage to devote all of its kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants to giving Eutelsat 10B the best ride possible, accelerating it to a higher speed and higher altitude during that first stage burn. In fact, the first stage on this mission will burn a few seconds longer than the first stages burn on Falcon 9 missions that have recovery in the profile, such as return to launch site or landing on a drone ship. So this gives the second stage an opportunity to take over the flight at a faster velocity at a higher altitude, and in the end, that results in the second stage placing the Eutelsat 10B spacecraft into a higher altitude orbit than would otherwise be possible. And this will actually expedite Eutelsat 10B's entry into commercial service, because this rocket will place Eutelsat 10B into an elliptical or elongated orbit called a super synchronous transfer orbit that ranges between a couple hundred miles above Earth on the low end up to about 37,000 miles on the high end. And Eutelsat 10B, after deploying from the rocket about a half hour after launch, will extend its solar panels. It'll use plasma thrusters to gently and slowly but efficiently resize and reshape that orbit to a circular orbit about 22,000 miles over the equator. That'll take several months, but using an expendable Falcon 9 rocket, placing the satellite into a higher orbit, speeds up that transfer orbit adjust time and means the satellite will be able to enter service a bit earlier than it otherwise would have if Eutelsat flew on a Falcon 9 that was reserving propellant for recovery. So Eutelsat, we believe, paid a premium for this expendable service. In fact, Intelsat, a competitor of Eutelsat, flew 2 satellites on an expendable Falcon 9 earlier this month, and Intelsat acknowledged that they paid a premium for an expendable launch because SpaceX is obviously losing this booster and lost that booster intentionally on that previous Intelsat mission as well. Although Eutelsat has not officially confirmed that they did, whether they did in fact pay a premium or how much, but we believe they did based on past comments from other companies. This satellite, Eutelsat 10B, carries several payloads. The main payloads are 2 Ku-band beams covering the North Atlantic, Europe, the Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, and Africa. These 2 Ku-band payloads will provide high-throughput broadband services for things like in-flight connectivity on airplanes, as well as internet for cruise ship passengers and connectivity for the maritime industry, the wider maritime industry as well. So this is a look at the only payload on this mission, Eutelsat 10B, owned by Eutelsat, which is a French satellite operator, heading to super synchronous transfer orbit tonight on the Falcon 9 rocket if weather permits the launch at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2:57 a.m. UTC. That satellite, Eutelsat 10B, is folded up, has its solar arrays stowed, its antennas stowed inside the nose cone of the Falcon 9 rocket for launch tonight. Launch time now 49 minutes away. We're now going to show a video from Thales Alenia Space, the manufacturer of Eutelsat 10B. I mentioned Thales assembled the satellite at their factory in Cannes, France. And here's some views of the integration of the various elements of the satellite. This particular video shows the integration of what's known as the payload module, which contains all the communications equipment on the spacecraft, over the service module of the spacecraft, which is the core of the satellite with the propulsion system and core elements such as communications and downlink services and command and data handling, computers, things like that. You can see the integration of this payload module over the service section of the satellite in the factory in France. This satellite is based on Thales's Spacebus Neo satellite design. Again, that's one of the new generation satellite platforms that has been developed in recent years. Good view of there of the different stacked layers of the Eutelsat 10B satellite at the service section on bottom, on top the communications payload in Ku band and C band. Now 47.5 minutes until the scheduled launch of the Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Eutelsat 10B was shipped from France to Florida on board a ship called the Colibri that's been used to transport satellites and rocket components across the ocean before. In fact, this vessel was used last year to transport the James Webb Space Telescope from its factory in Southern California to French Guiana for launch on an Ariane 5 rocket. So here's a view of the Eutelsat 10B satellite getting packed up for launch. This shipment occurred back in early October, I believe. See, it was stowed inside this climate-controlled shipping container, and there it is leaving the factory in southern France, heading to the port on the Mediterranean Sea for the transatlantic voyage to Florida on the MN Colibri roll-on, roll-off vessel. And there's that ship leaving France on the way to Florida a few weeks ago. Now back live at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We're looking live at the Falcon 9 vertical on pad 40. Now about 8 minutes away from one of the next milestones in the countdown, which should be the go, no-go poll for propellant loading. That will be followed, if the result is go, by the start of loading of kerosene and liquid oxygen at T-minus 35 minutes. SpaceX's countdown just passed the 40-minute mark until liftoff time. We're seeing some degraded visibility now as we look out toward pad 40 from our camera position at Kennedy Space Center 4 miles away. Some very light rain is falling here at this time. We should be coming up on the start of the conclusion of the pre-launch readiness poll of SpaceX's launch team. Again, this is SpaceX's second launch attempt of the day following the scrubbed countdown earlier this afternoon for a different Falcon 9 rocket at a different pad a few miles away from this one at Kennedy Space Center. That launch was set to carry a Dragon cargo ship into orbit on the way to the International Space Station with supplies and experiments for the station and its crew members. But that launch was scrubbed due to poor weather. That's been rescheduled for Saturday. And SpaceX is hoping to launch this Falcon 9 rocket tonight at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time with a commercial communications satellite for Eutelsat named Eutelsat 10B. We're not yet hearing any audio from SpaceX Launch Control. SpaceX typically provides that to us and to the public at this point in the countdown, but we're not yet getting any audio from the Launch Control, so we'll not sure we'll be able to give you any confirmation yet on the outcome of that pre-launch readiness poll and the start of propellant loading. We hope to get that audio shortly, and even without the audio, we will, once tanking begins, we will start to see some frost and ice build up on that scorched first stage booster out at pad 40. We'll see that dark charcoal colored skin turn white as frost builds up on the liquid oxygen tank. That liquid oxygen is chilled down and densified down to several hundred degrees below zero. That will be loaded into the first stage concurrently with kerosene fuel. Again, that is set to begin in 2.5 minutes. We're now just past the T-minus 35-minute point. Again, we're not hearing any audio yet from SpaceX Launch Control. We usually provide that to you on this stream as well. Once we get that feed, we'll do that. But we should have passed the point of the start of propellant loading. Propellant loading begins with pumping kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen into the first stage, as well as kerosene fuel into the second stage. The second stage's liquid oxygen tank won't begin loading until about T-minus 16 minutes. T-minus 31 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. We are seeing some first wisps of vapor around the Falcon 9 rocket, indicating that propellant loading has begun. Again, we're not hearing any audio from SpaceX Launch Control. They haven't started that feed for us as they would have normally done by now, but we can confirm their indications that propellant loading is underway. Now 26 minutes, 45 seconds remaining until today's launch attempt with Eutelsat 10B. We're continuing to see more vapors visible out at pad 40. Propellant loading is continuing out at pad 40 right now. Again, kerosene and liquid oxygen are flowing into stage 1, and kerosene should be flowing into stage 2 as well. We're about 10 minutes away from when liquid oxygen should start flowing into the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. Here's an overview of the SpaceX countdown timeline. We've already passed the first few milestones on this list with the go, no-go poll from SpaceX's launch director, as well as the start of RP1 and liquid oxygen loading at T-minus 35 minutes. RP1 is rocket propellant 1. It's a highly refined variant of kerosene fuel. At about T-minus 20 minutes and 30 seconds, we expect that the second stage will be fully loaded with kerosene fuel. A few moments later, we expect to see the so-called big vent from the strongback out at pad 40. That's the stream of vapors that will be coming out of a vent on that structure as SpaceX begins to thermally condition the liquid oxygen loading line that runs up that structure into the second stage. That's in advance of loading of liquid oxygen into the second stage tank itself. At T-minus 16 minutes, that liquid oxygen loading on stage 2 should be underway. And then in the final 10 minutes, there are a fast-paced series of events. At T-minus 7 minutes, the Falcon 9 rocket will begin chilling its 9 Merlin 1D first stage engines. Those Merlin 1D or M1D engines will be thermally conditioned for flight by flowing a little bit of liquid oxygen through the engine compartment to protect against the thermal shock of the rapid flow of cryogenic oxidizer at liftoff. At about T-minus 6 minutes, the first stage kerosene tank should be fully loaded. At T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strongback will begin retracting to an angle of about 1.5 degrees in preparation for the final phase of the countdown. At about T-minus 2 minutes, the liquid oxygen tanks on both stages should be confirmed full. At that point, fill and drain valves will be closed. At T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9's onboard computer will take command of the countdown. The Falcon 9 will also transition to internal power at T-minus 60 seconds. At T-minus 45 seconds, SpaceX's launch director will give their go for launch if everything looks good, if the weather's cooperating. And then at T-minus 3 seconds, the engine controller on the Falcon 9 rocket will give the command for engine start using an ignition fluid called TTAB, triethyl borane, triethyl aluminum. That's going to give off a characteristic green flash due to that chemical combination. Gives off a characteristic green flash at engine start. We'll see that green flash that'll quickly transition to the orange glow from the exhaust from the Merlin 1D engines. If those 9 engines all pass their automated health check, the computer will give the command to open hold-down clamps at the base of the rocket, allowing the Falcon 9 to begin its climb off the pad with Eutelsat 10B. Right now, from a technical perspective, everything appears to be going according to plan. 22 minutes, 25 seconds until the scheduled launch time. The only question mark is weather. 2 minutes, 21 minutes, 35 seconds. The next major milestone in the countdown this evening will be the completion of propellant loading on the first stage, or the second stage. I'm sorry, correction. Completion of fuel loading on the second stage. That will be followed by the so-called big vent. We'll see that very obvious stream of vapor, of oxygen gas, streaming away from the strongback, and that'll be followed again a few minutes later at 2 minutes, 16 minutes by the start of liquid oxygen loading on the second stage. Minutes, 20 minutes, 30 seconds. And there's the big vent from the strongback out at pad 40.
Stage 2 RP1 load is complete.
We just heard a call now. We're getting audio now from SpaceX Launch Control. We just heard the call that the stage 2 kerosene load is complete. Everything looking good right now from a technical perspective. 20 minutes until the target launch time for Eutelsat 10B. Now inside of 18 minutes, we're continuing to see this stream of oxygen gas vapor from the strongback here at Cape Canaveral, Florida. If you're just joining us, one more ask for you to please hit the like button here on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger audience and a larger following for our coverage as SpaceX counts down to liftoff at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We want as many people watching this launch as possible. One way to help us do that is to hit the like button, so please do that if you haven't done so already. You can also support our coverage by becoming a member of our YouTube channel. We have different membership tiers available for you to choose from. Depending on which level you select, you can gain access to exclusive members-only video features that we have as bonus materials there for our Spaceflight Now members on our YouTube channel. You can also contribute in the super chat here in the chat on YouTube as well. And any way you support our coverage, whether it's through our memberships, joining our channel, or through super chat, we really appreciate that support. Right now we're just switching video feeds to a different camera. We're setting up a different camera that we hadn't set up.
LOX load has started.
That we hadn't set up earlier due to some rainfall, so please stand by for just a moment. We'll have another view of the pad, a better view of the pad momentarily. The countdown continues at T-minus 16 minutes, 15 seconds. We just heard confirmation that the liquid oxygen loading on stage 2 is now underway. Everything looking good from that perspective, and we just heard the call that Eutelsat 10B, the spacecraft on board today's mission, is now on internal power. Here's a view of Eutelsat 10B. Again, this satellite was built by Thales Alenia Space. It's based on Thales's Spacebus Neo satellite platform. It weighs about 5.5 metric tons, 12,000 pounds. And again, the Falcon 9 rocket tonight is flying in expendable mode without any recovery planned for that booster. There are no landing legs and also no grid fins on this booster for recovery. All of the propellant on the Falcon 9 first stage booster will be devoted to pushing and propelling this satellite into as high of an orbit as possible. The reason is that will end up meaning Eutelsat 10B is better positioned to enter service sooner than it would otherwise had this launch flown in expendable or flown with a recovery of the first stage booster. Now seeing a view from our higher resolution camera of pad 40 as SpaceX counts down now inside 15 minutes until liftoff time. Thanks for bearing with us through that camera switchover. We promise you it will be worth it because this camera will bring you much improved views of this rocket as it lifts off this evening, we hope, weather permitting, at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:57 a.m. UTC. After liftoff this evening, the Falcon 9 rocket will be heading due east from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station to place Eutelsat 10B in an equatorial low inclination orbit on the way to a final perch about 22,000 miles over the equator in geostationary orbit. We've labeled here the location of Space Launch Complex 40, the departure point for this mission. The red line shows the approximate ground track as it heads downrange east out over the Atlantic Ocean. There's no drone ship deployed for tonight's mission because this is an expendable booster. This booster will not be recovered. It's flying for the 10th or the 11th and final time, this particular booster. There is a SpaceX recovery ship, Doug, about 600 miles or 1,000 kilometers east of the Cape to try to recover the 2 payload fairing halves after they parachute into the Atlantic Ocean. T-minus 7 minutes, 18 seconds. We're coming up on the next milestone in the countdown, which will be the chill down of the first stage engines.
Engine chill has started. Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
We've heard a couple of callouts in the last few moments from SpaceX Launch Control that the engine chill down on the first stage Merlin engines is underway. This is the process that thermally conditions those power plants for flight by flowing a little bit of liquid oxygen, the super cold oxidizer, through the engine compartment to protect those components against thermal shock with the more rapid flow of oxidizer at engine startup. Also, the first stage tank of kerosene is now full, so both stages are now fully loaded with rocket-grade kerosene, about 46,000 gallons in total. Liquid oxygen will continue flowing into the vehicle down until about T-minus 2 minutes. Now 5.5 minutes until tonight's launch. Right now, weather is trending favorably according to SpaceX, so fingers crossed, we hope to get this launch off the ground tonight. Again, this launch was scrubbed last night due to technical concern, an unspecified technical concern. Now 5 minutes, 5 seconds until liftoff. At this point, final configurations and testing are underway for the Falcon 9's navigation system, as well as the autonomous flight safety system.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
The next milestone will be the retraction of the strong back at pad 40 to an angle of about 1.5 degrees. This booster 1049, is going for its 11th and final flight. Here's a quick look at its flight history. This is the oldest active booster in SpaceX's fleet that will be expended tonight. It debuted back in September 2018, more than 4 years ago. Flight number 11 and the final flight for this booster on tap this evening. The strong back retract is now underway out at pad 40. It'll be reclining to an angle of about 1.5 degrees from the rocket. Again, if you haven't done so, one more appeal before launch. Please hit the like button on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger following for our coverage. 3.5 minutes to go. Again, it'll take about 35 minutes for the Falcon 9 to deliver Eutelsat 10B into its targeted super synchronous transfer orbit. Tonight's mission will target an apogee of about 60,000 kilometers. It's about 37,000 miles at its highest point. T-minus 2 minutes, 37 seconds. We've heard the call that stage 1 is now full of liquid oxygen. Stage 2 liquid oxygen should be fully loaded in the next few moments. Now, T-minus 1 minute, 6 seconds. At T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9 rocket will be transitioned to internal power. T-minus 60 seconds. Falcon 9 is in startup, so the Falcon 9's own computer is now controlling the final functions of the countdown. T-minus 45 seconds and counting. T-minus 20 seconds. Engine start should be at T-minus 3 seconds. T-minus 10. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket with Eutelsat 10B hauling a new broadband relay station to orbit. Booster 1049 making its final trip to space this evening. Falcon 9 is now pitching downrange. Hope you enjoyed that rumble from the Falcon 9 as it headed downrange. We've now switched over to SpaceX's feeds now that the rocket has climbed through some cloud cover here over Florida Space Coast. Minute 50 seconds into the flight. No problems reported so far as the Falcon 9 arcs to the east from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Coming up on main engine cutoff in a few moments, followed by stage separation. And ignition to the second stage should be coming up a few moments after that. We've heard confirmation of main engine cutoff, stage separation, and ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on stage 2. So Sayonara Booster 1049 heading for the Atlantic Ocean on its final flight, no recovery planned for this mission. The second stage now ramping up to full power, producing more than 200,000 pounds of thrust. The Merlin vacuum engine glowing red hot there as expected. The next major milestone will be coming in about 15 seconds. That'll be payload fairing Jettison. There's a really good view there of payload fairing Jettison.
Acquisition of signal, Bermuda.
Nose cone is away. That exposes the Eutelsat 10B satellite to the space environment for the first time. 4 minutes into the flight. This map shows the location of the rocket, now at an altitude of about 128 kilometers over the Atlantic Ocean, just north of the Bahamas. Four minutes, 30 seconds into the flight, altitude now 140 kilometers, velocity 12,500 kilometers per hour.
Stage 2 following a nominal trajectory.
Six minutes into the flight, about 2 minutes remaining until the expected cutoff of the second stage engine. No issues reported so far since the launch this evening, which occurred at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 minutes ago now. Altitude 164 kilometers, velocity approaching 17,000 kilometers per hour. T plus 7 minutes, 29 seconds into the flight. About 30 seconds
Stage
remaining.
2 is in terminal guidance.
We just heard a call that stage 2 is in terminal guidance, heading toward orbital insertion.
Stage 2 FTS has saved.
Coming up on SECO 1, second stage engine cutoff.
MVAC shutdown.
We've heard verbal confirmation now of MVAC shutdown. That's shutdown of the second stage engine.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And there's a call for nominal orbit insertion. So Falcon 9 and Eutelsat 10B are in a parking orbit. This is a low altitude orbit. The rocket will now coast for about 18 minutes until it approaches an intersection with the equator. At that point, the second stage engine will relight for about a 1-minute burn to power Eutelsat 10B into a much higher elliptical orbit. That will set the stage for separation or deployment of Eutelsat 10B about 35 minutes into the flight. "11 minutes into the flight of the Falcon 9 rocket with Eutelsat 10B. Here's a look at some of the major flight milestones. Some of these we've already passed. The most recent one was SECO 1, second stage engine cutoff, that occurred about 3 minutes ago. The Falcon 9 second stage and Eutelsat 10B are now coasting through low Earth orbit, setting up for a relight at T plus 26 minutes, 18 seconds. That'll be about a 1 minute, 9 second.
Loss of signal, Bermuda.
That'll be about a 1 minute, 9 second burn to accelerate and add velocity to the spacecraft to reach an orbit, a super-synchronous transfer orbit with an apogee or high point of about 37,000 miles or 60,000 kilometers. This is, again, a very elongated elliptical orbit that the Eutelsat 10B satellite will be separated into. After that burn, thrusters on the second stage will reorient to the proper orientation, proper pointing for deployment of Eutelsat 10B at 35 minutes, 28 seconds into the flight. So the mission is not over. Some of the major milestones are complete and behind us, but still a few critical events to come that will be crucial and vital to achieve a successful launch with Eutelsat 10B. Need to put that satellite into the proper orbit, and this next burn is necessary to do that. That burn now is about 14 minutes away. Now 17 minutes 50 seconds into the flight, we're showing this tracking map provided by SpaceX as the rocket is coasting across the Atlantic Ocean. It's now near the region of Cape Verde, heading for the west coast of Africa. And when it crosses the equator in the region of the Gulf of Guinea, the second stage will relight its engine for about 69 seconds. That burn will propel Eutelsat 10B into a higher altitude orbit, setting the stage for spacecraft separation. This was the second of 2 launches that were originally planned today as the day started. You're now looking at a view on the left of another Falcon 9 rocket still standing on its pad 39A, at Kennedy Space Center, a few miles north of where this one departed from this evening. This rocket was supposed to launch at 3:54 p.m. Eastern, about 6 hours ago, but storms or rain showers and thick clouds over the spaceport prevented this rocket from taking off. On top of the Falcon 9 at Pad 39A is a Dragon cargo capsule loaded with some 3.5 metric tons of cargo, experiments, and supplies, and new solar arrays heading to the International Space Station. But bad weather had other plans. This launch did not take off this afternoon as expected or as scheduled. So this launch, CRS-26 as it's known, will now be rescheduled for Saturday afternoon at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1920 UTC. Will be streaming that launch live on Saturday from Pad 39A. Weather should be much improved then, with a 70% probability of acceptable conditions for launch to begin this 26th resupply mission by SpaceX to the International Space Station. Meanwhile, back with our coverage of Eutelsat 10B, the second stage now just approaching the far western coastline of Africa, 20 minutes since the launch from Florida Space Coast.
Acquisition of signal, Gabon.
We're hearing a call just a moment ago from SpaceX Launch Control that the Falcon 9's upper stage, 24 minutes into the flight, is now passing in range of a downrange tracking station in Libreville, Gabon, on the west coast of Africa. About 2 minutes remaining until the restart of that engine on the second stage. T plus 26 minutes. We're just a few seconds away from the expected restart of the second stage engine. This will be a planned 69-second burn to inject Eutelsat 10B into a higher altitude super-synchronous transfer orbit. With the rocket in range of the Libreville, Gabon ground station, we hope to get some live video from the vehicle during this burn. We'll stand by to see if we get that. And there you see a live shot of the Merlin vacuum engine glowing red hot after an ignition to begin this 1 minute 9 second burn. The Merlin vacuum engine produces about 220,000 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space at full power. In this map, you can see the blue line, which is the predicted trajectory if the rocket engine were to cut off at this point, converging with the white line, which is the target path, the target orbit at engine cutoff. Those lines should be converging, and they do appear to be, as the engine imparts some additional velocity on the satellite, passing 35,000 kilometers per hour now. Engine cutoff, maximum speed 35,839 kilometers per hour.
Orbit insertion.
According to SpaceX's telemetry display, and we just heard a call from SpaceX Launch Control that they achieved a nominal orbit insertion, good words, to set the stage for deployment of Eutelsat 10B in about 7.5 minutes. That deployment of Eutelsat 10B is scheduled for T plus 35 minutes, 28 seconds. Here's a shot of Eutelsat 10B still mounted on the forward end of the Falcon 9's second stage. There's a shot of the Falcon 9's Merlin vacuum engine with its work complete tonight. Thrusters on the second stage of the Falcon 9 will be fired over the next few minutes to reorient the rocket into the proper attitude or pointing for spacecraft separation.
Acquisition of signal, RW stock.
A tracking station in Hartebeestuk, South Africa, has now acquired signals from the Falcon 9 rocket. Less than 5 minutes from payload separation. You can see the Falcon 9 now is in sunlight. A lot of these missions carrying satellites heading up to geosynchronous orbit. Launch in the evening hours local time that enables the satellite to deploy from the rocket in sunlight. And we're seeing that here. The Falcon 9 just passed into an orbital sunrise. That helps ensure that the solar rays on the newly launched satellite can receive solar energy and begin recharging the spacecraft's batteries. The spacecraft has been on internal battery power since for about 45 minutes now, since about the T-minus 15-minute mark. And after deployment, the spacecraft will extend solar panels and begin recharging its batteries. Really spectacular view from an onboard camera on the Falcon 9's second stage. You can see it is changing its orientation, its attitude, firing thrusters to get to the proper pointing for separation of Eutelsat 10B in about 2.5 minutes. Really good view here of the sun, and you can see the rates of the attitude changing. Some sun glint on the engine nozzle. The rocket is now passing over the eastern part of Africa. It will soon head out over the Indian Ocean. "35 minutes since launch. We're now less than 30 seconds, or less than a minute, about 30 seconds away from the expected deployment of Eutelsat 10B.
Payload deploy confirmed.
Eutelsat 10B separation confirmed. You can see the spacecraft built by Thales Alenia Space receding against the blackness of space there, flying over the Indian Ocean between Madagascar and the eastern coast of Africa at an altitude of more than 1,300 kilometers. Eutelsat 10B is beginning a 15-year mission to provide broadband internet services to applications like in-flight Wi-Fi, maritime communications, and other types of users in a swath of the Earth from the North Atlantic to the Middle East. Eutelsat 10B will be extending its solar panels later on and beginning maneuvers with its plasma thrusters, its all-electric propulsion system, to reshape its orbit from the elliptical supersynchronous transfer orbit to a circular orbit. It'll lower its apogee or high point, it'll raise its perigee or low point, and then maneuver from its inclination of about 22 degrees to an inclination of 0 over the equator. All that will take several months using the low thrust but highly efficient plasma engines on the satellite. Eutelsat says Eutelsat 10B should be ready to enter service by early summer of 2023. Again, the mission is to provide high throughput Ku-band services for aviation and maritime sectors. It's also providing some C-band and Ku-band services to extend some data relay applications currently served by the aging Eutelsat 10A satellite, which was launched back in 2009. So Eutelsat 10B is both a replacement and an expansion satellite for Eutelsat. Here's a live view of the empty Space Launch Complex 40 launch pad at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where the Falcon 9 lifted off at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 2:57 a.m. UTC. On a successful launch with Eutelsat 10B, we weren't sure the launch was going to happen because of some very iffy weather. In fact, at one point, the weather forecast for tonight showed a 90% probability of unfavorable weather, but that 10% won the day, and SpaceX was able to get the Falcon 9 off the ground tonight, just before the Thanksgiving holiday here in the U.S. The next launch from Florida will be on Saturday. That'll be a Falcon 9 rocket with a CRS-26 mission, a commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station. As we mentioned earlier, that launch was supposed to happen earlier today, but bad weather in the afternoon hours here in Florida prevented that launch from happening. That mission has been rescheduled for Saturday. Looking ahead at the launch calendar over the next few days, the next orbital launch attempt we'll be covering is on Thursday night, November the 24th. That'll be a European Vega C rocket launched from the Vega Launch Zone, ZLV, at the Guyana Space Center in Kourou, French Guiana. This mission by Arianespace will launch 2 Pleiades NEO satellites. These are the next 2 satellites in Airbus's very high-resolution optical imaging constellation. You may have seen images from these satellites of things like launch pads that these satellites often take pictures of. They take pictures of a much wider variety of targets, though, for commercial use and also a use by European military and European governments as well. So Pleiades NEO 5 and 6, launched as a pair, will be lifting off on a Vega C rocket on Thursday night at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:47 a.m. Friday UTC from the Guyana Space Center. On Saturday, India's Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle is set to launch an OceanSat 3 satellite. This is an oceanography satellite that will be measuring things like ocean color, ocean winds, which are that data has applications in areas like hurricane and cyclone forecasting. This launch will be from the Satish Dhawan Space Center on India's east coast. Later Saturday, I mentioned before, SpaceX will be back in action with a Falcon 9 launch from Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39A on the CRS-26 resupply mission to the International Space Station. And then 3 days later, on November the 29th, the next Tuesday, a week from today, will be the scheduled launch of a Falcon 9 rocket, again from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This mission will carry a commercial moon lander developed by the company iSpace. It's called iSpace Mission 1. It carries a range of experiments and commercial payloads to the moon. It'll be targeting a landing early next year on the lunar surface. And also on this mission are a couple of small miniature rovers that will be tested on the lunar surface, assuming the landing of the mission is successful. One rideshare payload of note on this mission, NASA's Lunar Flashlight, a small satellite, will be riding as a secondary payload hitchhiking to the moon on this Falcon 9 rocket. And Lunar Flashlight is actually one of the CubeSats that missed its launch opportunity on Artemis 1. There were 13 small rideshare hitchhiker payloads that were supposed to launch with the Space Launch System on Artemis 1. 3 of those missed their ride because they weren't ready in time for integration on the rocket back in mid-2021. But Lunar Flashlight is now ready for launch and has found another ride to the moon on SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. That launch with iSpace Mission 1 and NASA's Lunar Flashlight mission is scheduled for next Tuesday. It'll be a pre-dawn launch around 4 a.m. Eastern Time. So we'll leave you with one final view of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral. Just to recap, Eutelsat 10B lifted off at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time, 42 minutes ago. And a few moments ago at the T+35 minutes, we did see confirmation of separation of Eutelsat 10B into the planned super-synchronous transfer orbit. Another successful launch in the books for SpaceX tonight and for Eutelsat as well. We thank you for joining us for our live coverage. We'll have our next live stream on Saturday with the launch of the CRS-26 resupply mission by SpaceX from Kennedy Space Center. And check our website, spaceflightnow.com, for coverage of those other 2 missions in the next few days from French Guiana and from India. So until next time, I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from Kennedy Space Center. Have a good night.